Part 1. A Christmas Eve Invitation. The snow fell upon kings. Lacy like a conspiracy of silence. It did not fall with the playful abandon that delighted children, nor with the violence that halted trains and frightened the timid. No, this snow descended deliberately, thoughtfully, as though it wished to erase nothing, but to soften everything. Rooflines became gentle curves, hedges acquired dignity, and even the iron gates of King's Lacy Manor appeared less forbidding beneath their white crowns. Hercule Poirot disliked the cold. He disliked it intensely. From his seat in the railway carriage, wrapped in an immaculate wool coat that had been brushed within an inch of its life, Poirot gazed through the window with a mixture of disapproval and resignation. Snow, in his opinion, was untidy. It ruined shoes, muddied hems, and defied symmetry. And symmetry, to Hercule Poirot, was not merely a preference, it was a moral principle. Mon Dieu, he murmured, adjusting his mustache with gloved fingers. England at Christmas. Always the same cold fingers, damp bones, and an excess of sentiment. Across from him, Captain Hastings smiled indulgently. "You must admit, Poirot, it looks rather beautiful." Poirot sniffed. Beauty, yes, but beauty that conceals discomfort. Like a lady who smiles while plotting your ruin. Hastings laughed. "Trust you to find murder even in snowfall." Poirot's eyes flickered sharply. "Ah, but where there is concealment, there's always the possibility of crime." The train slowed, Brake sighing like an old man settling into an armchair. A sign drifted past the window. "King's Lacy. Here we are," Hastings said cheerfully. "Christmas in the countryside. What could be more peaceful?" Poirot rose with precision. "That, my friend, is exactly what troubles me." The letter 3 days earlier. Poirot had received the letter. It arrived in the morning post at Whitehaven Mansions, resting among bills and invitations like a swan among ducks. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and expensive. The address had been written in a careful, slightly trembling hand. Inside, the letter read, "My dear Monsieur Poirot, you do not know me personally, but I beg you to accept this invitation in the spirit in which it is sent, one of sincere concern and quiet desperation. I am hosting a small Christmas gathering at my home, King's Lacy Manor, on Christmas Eve. A wreath, an ordinary Christmas wreath, has become the source of a most extraordinary fear. I cannot explain more in writing. I fear I am being watched. Please come. Yours most sincerely." Mrs. Arabella Montague. Poirot had read the letter 3 times. "A wreath," he said thoughtfully. "Always the small things, Hastings. It is never the pistol on the table, it is the crumb on the floor." Hastings had shrugged. "Sounds like a nervous old lady with too much imagination." Poirot had smiled thinly. "Or like a woman who knows she will not be believed." He accepted the invitation at once. King's Lacy Manor. The manor loomed at the end of a long, snow-lined drive, its windows glowing amber against the darkening sky. Built in the late Victorian era, King's Lacy possessed the solid confidence of wealth that had never needed to apologize. A single wreath hung upon the massive oak front door. It was large, perfectly round, and richly green holly leaves glossy as lacquer. Pine needles dense and fragrant. Red berries gleamed like drops of frozen blood. A broad crimson ribbon was tied in an elaborate bow at the bottom. Poirot paused. He stared at the wreath. Something about it disturbed him. "Fine wreath," Hastings remarked, stamping snow from his boots. "Very festive." Poirot did not reply at once. His eyes moved not over the wreath as a whole, but over its details. The spacing of the berries, the angle of the bough, the exact positioning of the pine sprigs. "It is too perfect," he said at last. Hastings raised an eyebrow. "You see danger in good decoration now?" Poirot's voice was quiet. "Perfection is never accidental." Before Hastings could respond, The door opened. Mrs. Arabella Montague. Mrs. Montague was a woman of perhaps 65, dressed in black velvet despite the season. Her hair was silver and swept back with care. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and frightened. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, relief flooding her voice. "You came." "But of course," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "When a lady writes of fear, I do not ignore it." Her gaze flicked to the wreath behind him. For a fraction of a second, her composure cracked. "Please," she said quickly. "Come inside. It is warmer." As they entered the hall, Poirot noted the faint scent of pine and something else beneath it. Something sharp, metallic. The hall was decorated lavishly. Garlands wound the banister. Candles flickered in wall sconces. A tall Christmas tree glittered at the far end, adorned with antique ornaments. And yet there was tension in the air, invisible, but unmistakable. The guests. Poirot was introduced to the other guests one by one. There were only 6. Mrs. Montague explained. "A small gathering. I prefer intimacy." Sir Reginald Montague. Her husband, tall, stern, and distant, with a voice like chilled steel, Clara Montague. Sir Reginald's niece, a pale young woman with observant eyes and a nervous smile. Dr. Lionel Grant. The family physician, genial on the surface, calculating beneath, Edmund Blake. A business associate, smooth, charming, and watchful. Miss Violet Crane. Mrs. Montague's companion, quiet, mousy, and nearly invisible. Poirot greeted each politely, committing faces, tones, and mannerisms to memory. Every smile was examined, every pause was weighed. Dinner was served at 7. The table was elegant, the food excellent. Conversation flowed easily enough: weather, travel, Christmas traditions. Laughter even surfaced once or twice, but Poirot noticed. What was not discussed. No one mentioned the wreath. Not once, yet every person at the table glanced toward the hall door at intervals, as though expecting it to move or speak or accuse. Halfway through the meal, Mrs. Montague's hand trembled so violently that her wineglass rattled. Poirot leaned toward her. "Madame," he said gently, "perhaps now you will tell me why you fear this wreath." She swallowed. "It was not there yesterday." Hastings blinked. "But surely—" "No," she said sharply. "I oversee the decorations myself. That wreath appeared overnight. No servant admits to placing it. And when I tried to remove it," she stopped. Poirot's voice was soft. "Yes, there was blood," she whispered, "on the inside of the ribbon." Silence fell like a dropped plate. Poirot did not react outwardly. Inwardly, his mind was already racing. Blood, hidden, decorative, a message. Poirot reflects later that night. Poirot stood alone in the hall. The wreath hung motionless. He leaned close, not touching, merely observing. The bow concealed something. He was certain of it. A stain had been cleaned hastily, but not well enough for Hercule Poirot. "Christmas wreaths," he murmured, "are meant to welcome, to promise safety, joy." His eyes hardened. "But this one, it warns." Behind him, a floorboard creaked. Poirot straightened. Someone was watching him. Part 2. The wreath on the locked door. Hercule Poirot did not sleep well that night. This was unusual. At King's Lacy Manor, the bed was wide, the sheets crisp, and the room warm to a temperature that met Poirot's exacting standards. And yet, his mind refused to rest. It moved in careful circles, returning again and again to a single image: a perfect green wreath, a crimson ribbon, a stain concealed, not erased. At precisely 6 minutes past 2 in the morning, Poirot opened his eyes. Something was wrong. He lay still, listening. The house breathed around him soft creaks, the distant sigh of pipes, the faint ticking of a clock somewhere below. Then came another sound, a whisper of movement. Not footsteps exactly, more the suggestion of them. Poirot slipped from his bed with silent precision and reached for his dressing gown. He opened his door a fraction and peered into the corridor. The hall was dimly lit by a single lamp at the far end, and there, moving like a shadow that had learned to walk, was a figure. Poirot watched without sound as the figure descended the staircase and crossed the hall toward the front door, toward the wreath. Nocturnal visit. Poirot did not follow immediately. Instead, he waited. Timing, he knew, was everything. When he reached the foot of the stairs, the hall was empty once more. The wreath hung exactly as before, perfectly centered, immaculate, festive. And yet Poirot approached it slowly. The ribbon had been disturbed. Not much. Just enough. Someone had touched it. He leaned closer and inhaled gently. Beneath the pine and holly lingered the faint metallic scent he had noticed earlier. Blood did not lie. Behind him, a voice spoke sharply. "What are you doing?" Poirot turned. Sir Reginald Montague stood in the doorway of the library, his dressing gown belted tightly, his expression cold with irritation. "I could ask the same of you, Sir," Sir Reginald said. Poirot inclined his head politely. "I am an early riser." "And you?" Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. "This is my house." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "Which makes one wonder why you feel the need to patrol it like a sentry." Sir Reginald's eyes flicked briefly, involuntarily, to the wreath. "I don't like strangers meddling with my property," he said. Poirot smiled faintly. "Nor do I like strangers meddling with evidence." Sir Reginald stiffened. "Evidence of what?" "That," Poirot replied mildly, "is what I intend to discover." Sir Reginald said nothing more. He turned and disappeared back into the library, closing the door with unnecessary force. Poirot remained where he was for a long moment. Then he murmured softly, "Interesting." Morning tensions. Breakfast at King's Lacy Manor was served at 8. The guests gathered one by one, exchanging polite greetings that failed to disguise the strain beneath them. Even Captain Hastings sensed it now. "Everyone looks as though they expect bad news with their tea," he whispered to Poirot. Poirot nodded. "Because they do." Mrs. Montague entered last. She looked older than she had the night before. Her eyes were rimmed with red, and her hands shook as she poured her tea. "I hardly slept," she confessed. "I kept thinking I heard someone moving about." Poirot met her gaze steadily. "You were not mistaken, madame." Her teacup rattled. "You mean someone was?" "Yes," Poirot said calmly. "Someone visited the wreath during the night." Silence fell. Clara Montague gasped softly. Dr. Grant frowned. Edmund Blake leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "That's ridiculous," Blake said lightly. "Are we to accuse one another of fondling Christmas decorations now?" Poirot's eyes fixed on him. "If it were only decoration, monsieur, I would not be concerned." Sir Reginald cleared his throat sharply. "This is nonsense. Arabella, you are frightening everyone with these melodramas." Mrs. Montague's voice trembled, but it did not waver. "I am frightened because I have reason to be." Poirot set down his cup. "Madame," he said gently, "will you tell us now fully what you have not yet told me?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. "The past returns. 5 years ago," Mrs. Montague began, "a young woman named Eleanor Price died in this house." Hastings straightened. "Died how?" "She fell from the gallery," Mrs. Montague said. "It was ruled an accident." Poirot's fingers steepled. "But you do not believe it was?" "No," she whispered. "I never have." Eleanor Price had been Clara's governess. Young, clever, quiet. And Mrs. Montague believed, deeply unhappy. "She wanted to leave," Mrs. Montague said. "She confided in me. She said she knew something dangerous." Sir Reginald rose abruptly. "That is enough." Poirot did not look at him. "Dangerous to whom?" Mrs. Montague swallowed. "To my husband's business." Sir Reginald's face went white with anger. This is slander, is it? Poirot asked softly. Dr. Grant cleared his throat. The girl was unstable. I treated her myself. Poirot's gaze snapped to him. For what condition, doctor? Dr. Grant hesitated. Nervous exhaustion. Poirot smiled without warmth. A convenient diagnosis. Edmund Blake laughed again, a little too loudly. You're chasing ghosts, Poirot. A tragic accident from years ago, what has that to do with a wreath? Poirot rose. Because, he said quietly, the wreath is not decoration. It is a reminder. The locked door that afternoon, snow fell harder. The house seemed to shrink inward, drawing its occupants closer together. Poirot suggested a walk, but no one accepted. At 3 o'clock. Miss Violet Crane screamed. She had been the quietest of them all, almost invisible, as though she wished to take up as little space in the world as possible. Now her scream echoed through the house like a gunshot. They found her in the hall. The front door was locked. And on it hung the wreath, but now it had changed. Crimson ribbon had been untied. Inside the wreath, woven carefully among the branches, was something new. A lock of hair. Long. Dark. Clara Montague let out a sob. That's, Poirot nodded. Yes, Eleanor Price's hair. How can you possibly know that? Sir Reginald demanded. Poirot's voice was grave. Because it is bound with a thread from a governess's uniform. Blue cotton. No longer made. Mrs. Montague sank into a chair. It's begun, she whispered. Poirot turned to the locked door. He examined the lock closely. Curious, he murmured. Very curious, what? Hastings asked. The door was locked from the inside. Poirot's first conclusion that evening. Poirot gathered them all in the drawing room. I will say this much, he announced. What we are witnessing is not madness. It is not superstition. He gestured toward the hall. It is intelligence. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Someone in this house, Poirot continued, knows the truth about Eleanor Price's death. And someone else fears that truth. Sir Reginald's voice was icy. Are you accusing me? Poirot met his gaze steadily. Not yet. The wreath, he knew, had more to reveal, and it was not finished speaking. Part 3. A Death Beneath. Holly and pine snow transformed King's Lacey Manor into an island. By evening, the drive was impassable. The hedges vanished beneath white drifts, and the sky pressed low and heavy, as though the world itself wished to listen to what happened inside the house. Hercule Poirot stood at the drawing-room window, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out with mild dissatisfaction. To be cut off, he murmured, is always convenient for the criminal. Captain Hastings shivered. You think someone's going to be killed, then? Poirot did not answer immediately. He turned instead to the wreath hanging in the hall, visible through the open doorway. It seemed to watch them. The house after dusk dinner that night was a strained affair. No one spoke above a murmur. Forks scraped too loudly against plates. Glasses clinked with exaggerated care. The Christmas candles burned steadily, their cheerfulness grotesque against the mood. Clara Montague barely touched her food. Dr. Grant drank more than usual. Sir Reginald sat stiff-backed, his face carved from stone. Edmund Blake attempted conversation twice and abandoned it both times. Miss Violet Crane did not come to the table at all. She has a headache, Mrs. Montague explained, her voice hollow. I told her to rest. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. A pity, he said. Headaches have an unfortunate habit of arriving when one wishes to avoid something. Sir Reginald glared. Must you turn every triviality into an accusation? Poirot smiled politely. Only when it deserves it. The sound in the night, it was just after 10 when the scream came. Not Miss Crane's thin cry of earlier, but a deeper sound. Choked and terrible. Poirot was on his feet instantly. So, he said softly, it begins. They found the body in the conservatory. Sir Reginald Montague lay sprawled among overturned chairs, his face frozen in astonishment. One hand clutched at his chest. The other lay palm up, fingers curled as though grasping for something that had just slipped away. The glass doors stood open to the night. Snow drifted in gently, settling on the tiles like a shroud. Mrs. Montague collapsed with a cry. Clara screamed once and then went silent. Dr. Grant knelt beside the body, his professional instinct momentarily overriding his shock. "He's dead," he said after a moment. "Heart failure at least, that's what it appears to be." Poirot crouched, studying Sir Reginald carefully. "Appears," he repeated. His gaze fell upon Sir Reginald's fingers. There caught beneath the nails was a fleck of green. Pine. The wreath moves. Again Poirot straightened. "Hastings," he said quietly, "run to the hall." Hastings hesitated. "What for?" "The wreath." Hastings returned moments later. "Pale, it's gone." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Monsieur Blake," he said suddenly, "where were you when the scream occurred?" Blake started. "In the smoking room." "And you, doctor?" "With Miss Crane," Dr. Grant said quickly. "She was unwell." Poirot's eyes flicked to Mrs. Montague. "Madame?" "I was in my room," she whispered. "And Clara?" Clara shook her head violently. I was with Aunt Arabella earlier. But then I went to my room." Poirot nodded. "All very neat," he murmured. The discovery, the wreath, was found an hour later. It hung not on the front door, but above Sir Reginald's study. The crimson ribbon had been replaced, tied into a noose. Within the wreath lay something else now, a folded piece of paper. Poirot removed it carefully. On it, written in a firm, familiar hand, were the words. This was not an accident. Mrs. Montague gave a low moan. Poirot folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. "Mies Amos," he said gravely. "We have passed from warning to accusation. A medical certainty. Dr. Grant insisted on examining the body more thoroughly. I cannot be sure without proper instruments," he admitted, "but something troubles me." Poirot inclined his head. "Tell me." "The timing," Grant said. "Sir Reginald was angry earlier, yes, but not distressed enough to die of heart failure." Poirot nodded. "And if it were not his heart?" Grant hesitated. "Then poison is possible." Clara let out a strangled sound. Poirot's voice remained calm. "Which poison, doctor?" Grant swallowed. "Something fast-acting, tasteless, colorless." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Like digitalis," he suggested. Grant stiffened. "That's a heart stimulant in small doses," Poirot finished. "And a killer in large ones." Silence followed. Poirot's gaze rested on Dr. Grant with new intensity. "Miss Crane speaks." Miss Violet Crane finally emerged near midnight. She looked pale, but composed. "I heard everything," she said quietly. "There is no use pretending." Poirot gestured to a chair. "Then tell us what you know." She folded her hands. "I was Eleanor Price's sister." The room erupted. Mrs. Montague stared. "You never told me." "I was paid not to," Miss Crane said softly. "Sir Reginald arranged it. He said my silence would be rewarded." Poirot's voice was gentle. "And now?" "And now," she said, lifting her eyes, "justice is knocking on the door." Poirot's shadowed thought later, alone with Hastings, Poirot spoke quietly. "The wreath," he said, "is not the weapon. It is the stage. You think Miss Crane?" Poirot shook his head. "She has motive, yes. But motive is not guilt." He paced slowly. "No, Hastings. This crime required planning, knowledge, access, and courage," Hastings added. Poirot stopped. "Or desperation." He looked once more toward the wreath. "The truth is close now," he murmured. "And when it comes, it will be wrapped in something festive." Part 4. The false culprit the night after Sir Reginald Montague's death passed without sleep for anyone at King's Lacey Manor. Snow pressed against the windows like an uninvited witness. The house, once grand and confident, now felt cramped, its corridors too narrow, its rooms too full of unspoken thoughts. Poirot welcomed this. When people are uncomfortable, he murmured to Hastings, they make mistakes. An arrest of convenience by morning, the local constable arrived on skis. Breathless and apologetic. Constable Webb was young, earnest, and very much out of his depth. There's been a death, you say? And the roads, well, we're cut off for now. I'll have to do what I can. Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. Of course. And you will do it admirably. The constable examined the body, listened to Dr. Grant's preliminary findings, and took statements from the guests. It did not take long. Miss Violet Crane sat quietly while the others spoke. She did not interrupt. She did not defend herself. When the constable finally turned to her, his voice firm but uncertain, Poirot knew what was coming. You admit you were Eleanor Price's sister, Webb said. You had a motive. And you were in the house at the time of death. Miss Crane nodded once. Yes, Mrs. Montague cried out. Violet, no. Poirot remained silent. And, the constable continued, you admit Sir Reginald paid you to keep quiet. That suggests resentment. Miss Crane's voice was steady. It suggests guilt on his part. Not mine. But the constable had found his culprit. I'm afraid I must place you under arrest, he said. Poirot's mustache twitched. Poirot allows the error. Hastings was outraged. This is absurd, he protested. You can't honestly think. Poirot raised a hand. Let it be, he said quietly. Hastings stared at him. You think she's innocent? Yes, then why? Because, Poirot replied calmly, sometimes the fastest way to the truth is to allow a lie to grow. Miss Crane was confined to her room, guarded lightly by the constable. As she passed Poirot, she paused. You know, she said softly. Poirot met her eyes. Yes, then why do you not stop them? Poirot's voice was almost kind. Because the person who is truly guilty is watching very carefully. The doctor's nerves. Poirot turned his attention next to Dr. Lionel Grant. He found him alone in the study. Sir Reginald had died beneath, pouring himself a drink with an unsteady hand. You are troubled, Doctor, Poirot observed. Grant forced a smile. Who wouldn't be? Poirot gestured to the glass. At 10 in the morning? Grant flushed. I couldn't sleep. Poirot leaned closer. Tell me, Doctor, how well did you know Eleanor Price? Grant stiffened. I treated her for nervous exhaustion. Yes, Poirot's eyes were sharp. And did you ever prescribe digitalis? Grant hesitated, just a fraction too long. It's common enough, he said. For heart complaints. Poirot nodded. And who in this house has such a complaint? Grant swallowed. Sir Reginald did. Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed. And who adjusted his dosage last? Grant's glass rattled. A ribbon out of place that afternoon. Poirot asked permission to examine the wreath again. It now hung in the hall once more, restored to its original position too carefully. Poirot studied it like a painting. Then he smiled. The ribbon had been changed. This one, he murmured, is newer. The weave is different. Hastings frowned. So? So, Poirot said. Someone replaced it after Sir Reginald's death. Why change what already serves your purpose, unless the original ribbon incriminated you? He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small scrap of fabric. Blue cotton, from Eleanor Price's uniform. Someone removed the old ribbon, Poirot continued, because it held more than blood. Hastings' eyes widened. Poison? Precisely. The hidden alliance that evening. Poirot observed Clara Montague closely. She sat by the fire, pale and silent. Tell me, Poirot said gently, Did you love Eleanor Price? Clara's eyes filled with tears. She was kind to me. Kinder than my uncle ever was. And did she ever confide in you? Yes, Poirot nodded. About Sir Reginald's business? Clara looked away. About the doctor? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, he said softly. So there was an alliance. Clara's voice shook. She said Dr. Grant was falsifying medical records. Covering something up. Poison, Poirot suggested. Clara nodded. Poirot's quiet warning that night. Poirot spoke privately to Dr. Grant. I know, he said simply. Grant laughed weakly. You know nothing. Poirot smiled. Tomorrow, he said. I will ask you to demonstrate how Sir Reginald took his medicine. Grant's laughter stopped. And if you refuse, Poirot added, I will explain to Constable Webb why Miss Crane's arrest is very convenient for you. Grant's face collapsed. You can't prove it, he whispered. Poirot turned away. I do not need to prove it, he said. Not yet. A new danger as Poirot climbed the stairs. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned just in time to see a shadow retreat into the darkness. Someone had been listening, and someone now knew. Poirot was close. Part 5, A Season for Poison Christmas. Eve arrived beneath a sky the color of old pewter. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold remained sharp, unforgiving, and watchful. King's Lacy Manor lay wrapped in silence. Like a house holding its breath, Poirot welcomed the quiet. Silence, he murmured to Hastings, is when guilt speaks the loudest. Poirot sets the stage after breakfast. Poirot made an announcement. This evening, he said calmly, we shall have a small Christmas gathering. Nothing elaborate. A glass of wine, a modest supper, and afterward conversation. Sir Reginald's empty chair loomed like an accusation. Mrs. Montague looked startled. Is that wise, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot smiled reassuringly. It is necessary. Dr. Grant's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Poirot noticed. A visit to the kitchen late in the afternoon. Poirot wandered into the kitchen. The cook curtsied nervously. Can I help you, sir? Yes, Poirot said pleasantly. You may tell me who prepared Sir Reginald's medicine. The cook blinked. Why, Dr. Grant himself? He always insisted. Poirot nodded. And the wine for tonight? Already decanted, she said. Doctor's orders said it would help everyone relax. Poirot thanked her and left. His eyes were grave now. The second attempt evening fell. Candles flickered. The Christmas tree glowed. The wreath hung proudly on the door, beautiful, deceptive, and deadly. Poirot raised his glass. To peace, he said. They drank, all except one. Poirot did not touch his wine. Minutes passed. Clara Montague swayed suddenly, her face draining of color. Poirot was at her side instantly. Do not drink, he said sharply to the others. Put the glasses down. Dr. Grant stood frozen. Digitalis, Poirot said coldly. A smaller dose than last night, but enough to weaken the heart. Mrs. Montague cried out. Clara. She will live, Poirot said. Because this time the murderer was cautious. Grant's voice shook. This is madness. Poirot hit on him. No, he said softly. This is fear. The constable learns the truth. Constable. Webb was summoned at once. Poirot spoke plainly. The poison was placed in the decanter. Dr. Grant alone had access. He killed Sir Reginald and attempted to kill Clara because she knew too much. Grant laughed hysterically. Circumstantial nonsense. Poirot shook his head. You adjusted Sir Reginald's medication. You removed the poisoned ribbon from the wreath. You replaced it poorly. And you hoped Miss Crane would hang for your crime. Grant's eyes darted toward the door. Too late. The final ornament. Poirot stepped to the wreath. Eleanor Price discovered your crimes, he said quietly. You poisoned her slowly, then staged her fall. Miss Crane suspected. Sir Reginald knew and paid you both to keep silent. Grant's shoulders sagged. She was going to expose me, he whispered. Poirot's voice was merciless. So you wrapped murder in holly and pine. Justice before Christmas, Dr. Grant was arrested before midnight. Miss Crane was released. Clara survived. And the wreath was taken down. Mrs. Montague wept quietly as Poirot removed it himself. Evil, Poirot said gently, should never be allowed to masquerade as celebration. Poirot reflects later. Poirot stood by the fire. The smallest details, he said to Hastings, are always the most dangerous. Hastings nodded. I'll never look at a Christmas wreath the same way again. Poirot smiled faintly. Nor should you. Outside, the bells rang for Christmas. Inside, the truth finally rested. Part 6. The cost of silence. Christmas morning dawned. Pale and reluctant, the bells from the village church drifted faintly through the frozen air, their cheer sounding almost inappropriate. Within the walls of King's Lacey Manor, the house was no longer cut off. Men would arrive later. Statements would be taken, and order would resume, but for now, the manor existed in a fragile pause between crime and consequence. Hercule Poirot sat by the fire, warming his hands. Justice, he knew, was rarely festive, a confession without drama. Dr. Lionel Grant asked to see Poirot shortly after dawn. He no longer looked like a confident physician. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes were rimmed with exhaustion rather than fear. I suppose you want me to confess properly, Grant said dully. Poirot inclined his head. For your own peace, yes. Grant exhaled slowly. I never meant to kill Sir Reginald, he said. Not at first. Poirot remained silent. Eleanor Price discovered irregularities, patients who died conveniently, records altered, prescriptions changed. She confronted me. I panicked. And so you poisoned her, Poirot said softly. Grant nodded. Gradually. Enough to weaken her. Then I frightened her, told her she was ill, unstable. When she fell from the gallery, it was almost a relief. Poirot's expression hardened. And Sir Reginald? He knew, Grant whispered. He paid me to ensure his heart condition remained useful. A man on the brink of death is very obedient. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. And the wreath? He asked. Grant gave a bitter smile. A message. Miss Crane frightened me. I wanted her silent or blamed. Miss Crane's burden. Miss Violet Crane received the news calmly. I suspected, she said. But suspicion is not proof. Poirot studied her gently. You could have gone to the police. Yes, she agreed. And been dismissed as a bitter sister. Eleanor begged me to wait to gather evidence. Poirot nodded. Waiting can be dangerous. So can speaking too soon, she replied quietly. Poirot said nothing more. Clara's truth. Clara Montague spoke to Poirot in the afternoon. She sat wrapped in a shawl, her face still pale but steadier. My uncle was cruel, she said. But he was not a murderer. Poirot met her gaze. Cruelty often prepares the ground. Clara nodded slowly. Eleanor tried to protect me. She said the doctor frightened her more than my uncle ever did. Poirot rose. Then she died protecting you. Clara wept silently. Mrs. Montague's regret. Mrs. Arabella Montague asked Poirot to walk with her in the hall. The wreath was gone now. In its place hung nothing. I invited you too late, she said. I knew something was wrong years ago. Poirot's voice was kind. Fear has a way of persuading us that silence is safety. She looked up at him. And is it? No, Poirot said gently. It is only delay. Poirot and Hastings that evening. Hastings found Poirot packing. You solved it, Hastings said. But you don't seem pleased. Poirot fastened his case carefully. Justice is not victory, he said. It is balance restored. And balance is quiet. Hastings hesitated. Do you think it was worth it? All this for a wreath? Poirot paused. No, he said softly. It was for a woman whose death was hidden behind decoration. A final thought as Poirot prepared to leave. He glanced once more at the front door where the wreath had hung. The wood bore a faint mark, a shadow of green long gone. Evil, Poirot murmured. Always leaves a trace. The door closed behind him. Christmas continued. But King's Lacy Manor would never again celebrate without remembering. Part 7. When the bells ring late. The train did not leave King's Lacy immediately. Heavy snow still lingered on the outer lines. And so Hercule Poirot found himself remaining one more night, an inconvenience he accepted with thoughtful resignation. There are moments, he knew, when departure itself is premature, truth like snow must finish falling. The visitor after justice. It was near dusk when the visitor arrived. He was a thin man with careful manners and eyes that measured everything twice. He presented his card without flourish. Mr. Harold Finch, solicitor at law. I represent the late Sir Reginald Montague, he said quietly. And before you leave, Monsieur Poirot, I believe you should know something. Poirot inclined his head. Please, he said. Truth has a habit of arriving when invited or not. The second agreement. Finch unfolded a document with deliberate care. This, he said, is a private memorandum, not part of Sir Reginald's official will. Poirot read. His eyes narrowed. A second payment, he murmured. Regular, quiet, to Dr. Grant. Yes, Finch replied. But not for silence alone. Poirot looked up sharply. Sir Reginald knew Grant was poisoning Eleanor Price, Finch said. He did nothing. In exchange, Grant prolonged his own life, just enough. Poirot closed the document slowly. So Sir Reginald purchased time with complicity, he said, and paid with his life. Finch nodded. I suspected nothing until after the arrest. Poirot returned the paper. Thank you, he said. Some truths arrive too late to save anyone, but not too late to be told. Miss Crane's choice, Miss Violet Crane, asked to see Poirot that evening. I am leaving, she said. I cannot stay here. Poirot studied her quietly. Where will you go? Somewhere anonymous, she replied. Somewhere my sister's death is not a shadow on the wall. Poirot nodded. Justice has been done, she said. But it feels unfinished. Poirot's voice was gentle. Justice is a process, mademoiselle. Closure is a hope. She smiled faintly. Then I will hope. A question of guilt that night. Hastings voiced what troubled him. Sir Reginald was guilty, he said. But he was murdered. How do you reconcile that? Poirot considered. The law, he said slowly, punishes acts. Conscience punishes knowledge. And Sir Reginald? Poirot looked toward the darkened hall. He lived with knowledge. And died because of it. The unspoken apology. Mrs. Montague did not sleep. Poirot found her sitting alone in the drawing room, staring at the fire. I knew, she said suddenly. Not everything, but enough. Poirot said nothing. I told myself I was protecting the family, she whispered. But I was protecting comfort. Poirot nodded gently. Comfort is often the most dangerous accomplice. She looked up. Do you forgive me? Poirot's answer was quiet. Forgiveness is not mine to give. Only understanding. Poirot's private reckoning later. Poirot stood alone by the front door. The place where the wreath had hung felt oddly bare, like a wound healed too quickly, leaving thin skin beneath. A symbol, he murmured, is never innocent. He adjusted his mustache with care. Nor, he added softly, are those who choose not to see. Departure delayed the next morning. The train whistle echoed faintly through the valley. Poirot gathered his things. As he stepped into the carriage, Hastings followed, pausing to look back at the manor one last time. It looks peaceful again, Hastings said. Poirot shook his head. It looks quiet, he corrected. Peace requires memory. The train began to move, behind them. King's Lacy Manor receded into the white distance, holding its secrets, but no longer protected by silence. Part 8. The Witness Who Waited. The train lurched forward, then slowed again. Snow had claimed the tracks once more. Hercule Poirot sighed with delicate irritation. "It appears," he said to Hastings, "that fate is reluctant to release us." Hastings laughed. "Or perhaps there's still unfinished business." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Just so." An unexpected message. Before the train could fully halt, a uniformed railway porter hurried down the carriage. "Monsieur Poirot?" he asked breathlessly. "There's a telegram just arrived from King's Lacy." Poirot accepted it. The message was brief. A new statement. "Urgent. Please return. Constable W.B.B. Poirot." Folded the paper with care. "Well," he said, rising, "it seems the past has one more thing to say." The forgotten servant, back at the manor. Poirot was taken directly to the servants' hall. There, sitting nervously by the fire, was an elderly woman with gnarled hands and anxious eyes. "This is Mrs. Elspeth Moore," Constable Webb explained. "Former housemaid. She left years ago." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame." She wrung her hands. "I didn't mean to interfere," she said. "But after all that's happened, I can't keep quiet anymore." Poirot's voice was gentle. "You have done well to speak now. The night Eleanor died, I was working late," Mrs. Moore said, "polishing the banister. I heard voices on the gallery." Poirot leaned forward. "Whose voices?" "Eleanor Price," Mrs. Moore said. "And another woman." Mrs. Montague stiffened. "She sounded frightened," the maid continued. "She said, 'You promised you wouldn't tell him.'" Poirot asked softly, "Who was the other woman?" Mrs. Moore hesitated. It was Mrs. Montague. The room fell silent. "A complicated truth, Mrs." Montague's face drained of color. "I never touched her," she said quickly. "I only begged her not to speak." Poirot nodded. "And what did you beg her not to speak of?" Mrs. Montague closed her eyes. "The affair," she whispered. Hastings blinked. "Affair?" "With Dr. Grant," Mrs. Montague said. "Years ago. Before I realized what he truly was." Poirot absorbed this quietly. "And Eleanor Price knew?" "She suspected," Mrs. Montague said. "She confronted me. She said silence was dangerous." Poirot's voice was calm. "And then?" "I left her there," Mrs. Montague said. "Alive." Revisiting the fall, Poirot requested to see the gallery. Standing there, he measured the distance, the rail, the drop. This was not a push, he said at last. Constable Webb frowned. "But it was fear," Poirot said. "Eleanor was already weakened by poison. She panicked. She lost her balance." Mrs. Moore nodded. "She screamed. Then she fell." Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Murder," he said softly, "can be committed by hands or by knowledge." The wreath's first meaning. Poirot returned to the hall. "The wreath," he said, "was not created this year." Mrs. Montague gasped. "What?" "The design," Poirot continued. "The ribbon. The symmetry. It was Eleanor Price's handiwork." Miss Crane looked up sharply. "She used to make them. Every Christmas." Poirot nodded. Double quotes. "Dr. Grant recreated it to mock her, to threaten, to control." A truth at last. Constable Webb exhaled. "So no one pushed her?" Poirot shook his head. "But many failed her." He turned to Mrs. Montague. "You did not kill her," he said, "but you helped make her afraid." Mrs. Montague wept silently. The weight of knowing later. Hastings spoke quietly. "Does this change anything?" Poirot considered. "It changes blame," he said. "Not guilt." He adjusted his mustache. "And it explains why the wreath had to be perfect." Part 9. Poirot reconstructs the past. Drawing room at King's Lacey Manor was prepared with almost ceremonial care. Chairs were arranged in a precise half-circle. The fire burned low. Outside, the last of the snow began to melt, dripping from the eaves like time itself slipping away. Hercule Poirot stood before the mantelpiece. "My friends," he said calmly, "before I leave, there remains one duty." No one interrupted. Poirot was never more formidable than when he spoke softly. "The timeline assembled 5 years ago," Poirot began. "Eleanor Price entered this house as a governess. Intelligent, observant, and unlucky." He turned slightly, his gaze moving from face to face. She noticed discrepancies in medical records. Prescriptions that did not match symptoms. Deaths that arrived conveniently. Dr. Grant lowered his eyes. She spoke first to Miss Crane, her sister, then to Clara, and finally, Poirot looked at Mrs. Montague. "To you, madame." Mrs. Montague nodded faintly. "She threatened no one," Poirot continued. "She only insisted that truth, once seen, must be spoken. Fear as the true weapon. Dr. Grant did not kill Eleanor with a blow," Poirot said. "He killed her with fear." He gestured to the gallery. "She was weakened by poison, confused, terrified, and when confronted with silence from those she trusted, she lost her footing." Hastings spoke quietly. "So her death was indirect?" Poirot nodded. "But no less a crime." Sir Reginald's bargain. Poirot's voice hardened. Sir Reginald learned the truth. And instead of justice, he chose convenience. He paused. He paid Dr. Grant. He paid Miss Crane, and he paid with his conscience. Mrs. Montague covered her face. "The wreath," Poirot said, "was Dr. Grant's masterpiece. A symbol, a threat, a reminder that he still controlled the narrative." The Christmas killings. Poirot's gaze locked onto Dr. Grant. "When Miss Crane's presence threatened exposure, you acted." Grant did not deny it. "You poisoned Sir Reginald with digitalis," Poirot said. "A dose designed to look like heart failure." Poirot's eyes flashed. "And when Clara remained a danger, you tried again." Clara shuddered. While the wreath traveled. Poirot smiled faintly. "The wreath moved because it was never decoration. It was punctuation." A ripple of unease passed through the room. It appeared to warn. It disappeared to accuse. It reappeared to condemn. Poirot's voice dropped. "And finally, it was meant to kill." The final silence broken. Constable Webb cleared his throat. "So it's finished." Poirot shook his head. "Not finished," he said. "Understood." He turned to Mrs. Montague. "You are not a murderer," he said gently. "But you are responsible." She nodded, tears falling freely. Poirot turned to Miss Crane. "You waited," he said. "And waiting saved no one, but it did not damn you." Miss Crane bowed her head. Poirot faced Dr. Grant last. "You believed intelligence made you superior," Poirot said. "It did not. It made you precise." Grant whispered. "I only wanted control." Poirot's reply was quiet and merciless. "Control is the illusion criminals love most." A Christmas without illusions. The fire crackled softly. Outside, bells rang again. Poirot straightened his coat. "The past cannot be corrected," he said. "But it can be named." He turned toward the door. "And once named, it loses its power." Part 10. The wreath comes down. The morning Poirot finally left King's Lacey Manor was clear and pale, as though the world had washed its face overnight. Snow no longer softened the edges of the house. Without its white disguise, the manor looked older, less forgiving. Truth had that effect on places as well as people. Poirot approved. "The last goodbye, Mrs." Arabella Montague stood in the hall as Poirot prepared to depart. "There will be no wreath this year," she said quietly. Poirot nodded. "That is wise." She hesitated. "Do you think we will ever be forgiven?" Poirot fastened his gloves with care. "Forgiveness," he said, "is not a season. It is a long road." She bowed her head. Miss Crane's departure. Miss Violet Crane left that same morning. She paused beside Poirot on the drive. "My sister loved Christmas," she said softly. "She made things beautiful." Poirot met her eyes. "Then remember her for what she created," he said. "Not for what was done to her." Miss Crane smiled faintly and walked on. Clara's future Clara Montague would not remain at King's Lacy. She planned to study nursing. Inspired by Eleanor's compassion and her own narrow escape. "Fear ends," Poirot told her. "Purpose begins." She nodded, holding that sentence like a talisman. "Justice takes its course, Dar." Lionel Grant was taken away before noon. He did not look back at the house. Poirot watched him go without satisfaction. "Punishment," he said to Hastings, "is not the opposite of crime. It is the echo." Hastings said nothing. The empty door before leaving. Poirot walked once more to the front door. The mark where the wreath had hung was barely visible, now a faint discoloration. Easily ignored. Poirot touched the wood gently. "A symbol," he murmured, "has power only while we pretend it does not." He turned away. On the train again, the train carried Poirot and Hastings back toward London. Fields passed. Smoke curled. Life resumed its steady rhythm. Hastings broke the silence. "You know, Poirot, this wasn't really about murder at all." Poirot smiled faintly. "No," he agreed. "It was about silence." Poirot's last word as the train entered a tunnel. Poirot spoke once more. "Evil often hides behind tradition," he said. "Behind decorations. Behind the familiar." Hastings nodded. "And the wreath?" he asked. Poirot's eyes were thoughtful. "The wreath," he said, "was only the messenger." The train emerged into sunlight. Christmas passed. Truth remained. The end.